Hey guys, John V here from Phone Reno. Right now you're watching our in-depth video comparison between the LG G2 and the Motorola Moto X. Now these two are Android smartphones, flagship smartphones in fact, from their respective companies. The G2 is the latest device on the scene and it's just a specs beast in every way. In contrast, the Moto X is a lot more modest in terms of its spec sheet, but has a cool customizable design that we haven't seen elsewhere. So we're going to compare these two devices and find out how they stack up against one another. There are a lot of attractive things with the designs of both handsets. First and foremost, it's worth noting that it's plastic casings with both. So it's not necessarily the most premium, but it does contribute in making both handsets very lightweight. In terms of size, we're going to give it to the Motorola Moto X just because it's the more compact and more natural feeling device to hold, whereas with the LG G2, it's larger and a little bit more unwieldy. As far as the materials, like we said, it is plastic, but with the LG G2, it uses a glossy finish, so it's a lot more prone to fingerprints and smudges, but when it's clean, it has a very nice luster to it. Definitely stands out with the pattern there. But with the Moto X, it still continues to be the cleaner looking device just because of its matte finish. And the other cool part is just the customizability of its design. You could change up the colors of its rear casing, the front casing, and even the accent colors, and you have complete control in every respect with the design. So that's something you don't see with other smartphones in this day and age. There isn't much of a comparison here. The LG G2 has the superior display. It's a 5.2-inch 1080p advanced IPS LCD display on there versus the smaller 4.7-inch 720p AMOLED display of the Moto X. Now, on paper, of course, the LG G2 wins when it comes to the details department, and we definitely notice it, but you don't only tend to see it when you're looking at the devices up close. So, for example, if you're looking at the web browser and you look very close, that's the only time we can actually notice the detail superiority of the LG G2's display. But aside from that, both are more than legible. When it comes to color reproduction, you're going to get more natural tones with the LG G2's IPS LCD display. It doesn't have the over-saturated look of the Moto X's AMOLED display. And when it comes to viewing angles, they both exhibit some very nice wide ones. But when it comes to outdoor visibility, it's the LG G2 that really shines as it stays very clear versus the Moto X, which tends to wash out. Meanwhile, above their displays, we find their earpieces, their light and proximity sensors, and their front-facing cameras. It's a 2-megapixel one in the Moto X versus a slightly larger 2-megapixel camera on the G2. Taking a look around the trims of both handsets, we find some of the same ports. We have the micro USB ports for data connectivity, 3.5mm headset jacks. It's on the top of the Moto X and on the bottom of the LG G2. But strangely enough, the power button volume controls are placed on the back of the phone on the G2. A little bit untraditional spot, but still works rather well. We just wish that the power button's a little bit more raised and distinctive. It's not a problem with the Moto X's set of buttons. They might be thin, but they're very tactile and still distinctive. And finally, in the back of both phones, we have the respective cameras. It's a 13-megapixel autofocus camera in the LG G2 versus a 10-megapixel clear pixel camera of the Moto X. You could tell they're both flush with the surface, which is great. They also feature LED flashes and the ability to shoot 1080p videos. Unfortunately, neither handset has expandable storage, so we're mainly left reserved to use their internal capacities. With the Moto X, it's available in both 16 and 32GB capacities, and the G2 has 32GB of memory. At heart, both smartphones are running Android 4.2.2 Jelly Beans, so as far as the base functionality, it's all intact with both these handsets. Of course, with the notifications panel, it's a centralized hub where we can gain access to all of them. And on top of that, we have some useful stuff such as some connectivity functions and even access to things like changing the brightness settings directly from there. So it's pretty much similar in that respect. However, when it comes to the look and feel of the respective UIs, totally different. The Moto X opts for a mostly stock Android experience, so it's cleaner, it's a lot more simple to use, and doesn't have the complexities of the LG G2. Now, G2, you could see here, just scrolling through the home screen, you have all these animations, so you customize a bunch of stuff. Of course, you have all the widgets in play with both handsets, but you have just a little bit more flexibility and complexity with the LG G2's UI. On the surface, the multitasking aspect of both handsets is pretty much done in the same manner. You have the Quick Apps menu, which allows us to basically go in and out of various applications at will. It's very useful, but with the LG G2, they've kind of enhanced the experience a little bit more just because you have a few things. The first one is the Q-Slide applications, which is pretty useful because certain apps, for example, some of the core organizer apps are going to be layered on top of whatever we're doing, so we have access to them anytime. The other one here is just the slide aside feature, which is pretty neat. So you can save up to 3 different things at the same time, and when you want to access them, you just swipe with 3 fingers on the right and you have the windows right there for you. Being Android smartphones, so the 2 handsets benefit from the Google Now experience. So you get a lot of useful information directly from the service, but they have their own respective voice-activated service as well. So with the LG G2, it has the VoiceMate feature as its own voice-guided services. And of course, you have touchless control on the Moto X. Now, between the two, we find the Moto X to have the better implementation just because it's constantly listening. So even if the phone's turned off, you could just simply say the keyword, "Okay, Google Now." And then from there, it's going to automatically launch the service. With LG G2 though, and the VoiceMate, it doesn't, if you have it turned off, you can't launch the service. You actually have to go to the home screen here and just say LG Mobile. So from there, you'll be able to access that. It's not constantly listening. So there are a couple of cool features on both handsets that we really like, and the first one here we're going to show you is just the LG G2. It's the knock-on feature. You can just double tap the screen to turn it on, and anywhere again, on any dead space to turn it off. That's just an alternative way of turning on the device instead of using the physical power button. And on the Moto X, it has the active display, which is very, very useful, we gotta admit. First of all, if you take it in your pocket or if you flip it over from its front, it automatically will show you the time and some useful notifications. And that's something we still don't tend to see with other smartphones today. On paper, it's no questioning that the LG G2 wins in the specs department. It's powered by a quad-core 2.26 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor with 2 GB of RAM. In contrast, the Motorola Moto X relies on Motorola's own X8 mobile computing system, which basically consists of a heavily modified dual-core 1.7 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon S4 Pro processor. But even though there's a huge disparity between the hardware they use, and when it comes to real-world performance, the two exhibit the same lovable speeds and responses that we like. So they're very quick and peppy. We don't see that much lag or slowing with either device. And the same operations, they're pretty much able to maintain the same responsive rate, which is lovely. So whether it's complex operations like playing games to simple things like surfing the web, both handsets are pretty much quick. At the end of the day, both handsets are wonderful for surfing the web just because you have 4G LTE connectivity on board with both, and they're also really quick with things like page rendering, kinetic scrolling, and pinch zooming. But the difference here just comes down to the larger display and high resolution display of the LG G2, so you can see more stuff on screen at a single time. Both feature the Google Play Music application out of the box. As far as the presentation functionality, identical. But the LG G2 also has an alternative music player. It's LG's own music player. It's still rather conventional by today's standards. And when it comes to the audio quality with the respective speakers, we gotta say, even though the Moto X's speaker is on the back, whereas it's on the bottom on the LG G2, we find that the Moto X to produce the stronger volume output between the two. You can honestly get away with either device when it comes to the video watching experience, but just because, again, the LG G2 has that larger and higher resolution display, it just seems more ideal than the Moto X. They both are able to play high definition videos with no problems at all, but again, it's just that superior display in the LG G2 that really shines, especially with outdoor visibility. So here are the camera UIs on both handsets, and honestly, they differ greatly between one another. On one hand, the LG G2 is just filled to the roof with manual controls and shooting modes to really appease that inner photographer in you. But if you don't want to be hassled by any of that, you'll like the Moto X just because it's a simple interface here that just gets the job done when it comes to taking photos. Another cool thing to mention about both handsets is in the way they actually access the camera UI. So with the LG G2, all you gotta do is just hold down the volume down key for a few seconds and instantly jumps right into the camera app. With Motorola's take, it's just a quick double twist with the wrist and automatically will launch the camera app itself. You have a 13 megapixel autofocus camera on the LG G2, while the Moto X opts for a 10 megapixel clear pixel camera. And quite frankly, when it comes to quality, we gotta say that both are pretty great, especially with outdoor shots. As long as there's plenty of lighting, it's almost hard to distinguish which one of the two is better. But we do notice that the LG G2 really shows its worth in lower lighting conditions, just because its photos just seem to be sharper, whereas with the Moto X, it tends to be more noisy with its shots. At the same time, we also favor the LG G2 when it comes to 1080p high definition video recording quality, just because it just seems to be sharper overall. Now, the cool thing about the LG G2 is that it offers 60 frames per second capture in addition to 30 frames per second in 1080p, whereas with the Moto X, it's only at 30 frames per second in 1080p. With the LG G2 though, it has a lower exposure, so some details are lost, but still sharp looking. With the Moto X, there's some distracting elements, for example, some heavier artifacting, and also a little bit more overexposed with its looks. Neither handset really wowed us with their call qualities. With the Moto X, voices tend to have a robotic tone to them, and with the LG G2, the microphone tends to make voices sound a little bit unclear, so at the end of the day, they're just basically average at best. Inside of the LG G2, it's packing the beefier 3000 mAh battery, whereas with the Moto X, it's only 2200 mAh one in there. Now, as far as the real-world performance, we're able to get 1/2 days of normal usage out of the LG G2, which is better than a single day of usage out of the Moto X. When we look at pricing, it's almost obvious that the LG G2 gets the most bang for the buck, especially when both handsets are $200 with a 2-year contract, but with the G2, you're getting the handset with the better spec sheet and, of course, more memory, 32 gigabytes starting off. Whereas with the Moto X, it's more modest with its spec sheet, and on top of that, it's only half the memory size at only 16 gigabytes. But don't count out the Moto X just because it's still a great handset to check out, especially with its cool customizable design and its simplified Android experience. It might not offer all the complexities and the comprehensive features that the G2 offers with its experience, but most people will just appreciate something that's simple and easy to use. So if you guys want to learn more about either handsets, you can check out our website, phonearena.com. It's John V. Thanks for watching.